the idea, being right by those trains that had so much, travel and destiny. I just love those trains. The trains are such a metaphor for, for getting places and having huge amounts of stuff go from one. And there's kind of a nostalgia there. That Duwamish has this kind of spiritual and historical
For sure.
significance. And it was cool seeing
Yeah, it was
those.
cool. It was cool. The banks were exposed and the water was very low, and it was a good time, so I appreciate it. You've asked me to summarize, and I have been over a lot of different places, and I want to start right back where we did this morning with that essay by Alan Capro, The Education of the Unartist. An important late 60s essay that I think artists should look at again. As I see people enter the market in the commercial setting, the museum setting, the civic city arts program setting, I've been a part of all of those programs, and I think artists today are changing. I think art is changing. I think it's a dynamic time. So I don't really have a polemic like a theory that can be, I suppose, can be argued for or against. And if I were to back into the corner of a polemic, I would say that Capro was onto something when he said in that essay, more than anything today, artists need to evade their profession. They need to evade that sense of profession. And his audience at the time were young artists. He was teaching at an art school in New York. And so he's telling young artists, don't go the main path. Don't go into that main path. Avoid the gallery. Avoid the museum. And today I look and it's like people never heard that voice coming out of the 60s. The Smithson thing, museums were bad, galleries were bad, the White Cube was bad. We escaped all that. And yet here we are 40 or 50 years later, I want to be in a gallery, and it's just, no, you don't. You need to evade your profession. That's my polemic. And I think people need to understand it a little bit better. What does it mean? I've tried to understand what it means myself. And maybe if the other thing I want to talk about is the field also, and then maybe try to connect the dots that way. But maybe one way, how do you evade your profession? Maybe one way to do that is with this concept of the field that I was talking about earlier. We were just in the field today. When I changed into my swim trunks and jumped in that river, that was the field to me. We were in the field. We were doing field work. And that's where you're not sure what's going to happen. You're out there sort of experimenting with your tech. You're mic'd up. It could be windy. There could be distortion. It's hard. There's a lot of variables. So that's what I love about the field, though. So thank you again for taking me there. So Alan Capro, Education of the Unartist, says you got to evade your profession. And it was like, what the hell does that mean? Yes, I want to be a successful artist, but if he means that you got to seek new paths. And again, it's ironic that he's in a position of being a college professor lecturing us about evading the profession when he frickin' represents the profession right there. So how did he do that? He didn't do it. He didn't do a very good job of evading it because there he is, mansplaining to us. But so I have taken it to heart. Earlier I was talking about the ways of escaping into a different pathway so that as an artist, you find a context maybe where there's not a lot of other artists or art being made. You join a planning commission. You join a neighborhood arts or neighborhood advisory council. It has nothing to do with art. They're concerned with parks and conservation and so forth. And yet you're there. You're an artist that's embedded into a neighborhood advisory council or into a planning commission, and you're offering practical steps about how to imagine things, how to rethink things, how to be creative about solving problems. And that's where I think artists are becoming needed, are needed. But artists today, I don't know if they feel needed in that way. I think artists are still, absorbed in the gallery, and God bless them. If I were a successful gallery artist, I'd be happy. It's hard to make a living from your art, and if you get to a point where you're in a commercial gallery or 2 or 3 or 4, you're doing great. And you're making a living as an artist. But have you evaded your profession? I think Mr. Capro would sadly shake his head and say, no, you have not. You've done something successful for you, but have you helped the field of the arts? Have you helped artwork itself? Have you really pioneered a new place for art to occupy or exist or inhabit, so that art changes and it moves forward and influences different parts of society? It's not just trapped over here in entertainment or massive sporting events or decorative aspects, but it's really a fundamental activity that we collect and value for what it tells us about the imagination and the creative process. So maybe one way to avoid your profession is to seek, again, take your BFA or whatever, MFA, mine is in poetry, and to seek employment in like the sciences with that BFA or that MFA. But what you're doing then is you're taking a creative degree and going into another field. And again, back at the Renaissance, we didn't have these academic disciplinary boundaries. And it's good to break those down and continue to think about what the world would be like if art and science were in the same room and not really separate activities at all. So maybe it's possible to go back and do that and have a BFA or an MFA and go into an applied context where you're working with other non-artists, you're helping non-artists with their much needed imagination and creativity skills, and you're modeling thinking for those people and helping them with projects and making, which they need, not just from the STEM or STEAM background. Well, STEAM, yes, because it includes the arts, but Capro, back to Capro, I wonder if you were, when we were talking about that earlier, if you were thinking about whether you have evaded the profession or not, or whether, or people, other people, whether they see that even as a problem, or whether we were talking about the market and saying, no, I want to be a part of the market. I'm a good late stage capitalist. I want to make a living and off of my work, my objects, and selling those on a marketplace is a great way to do that. But I think Capro was after something beyond that, something that came out of the 60s that said, yes, everything in America is on the market. There is no outside the marketplace. But if we evolve this idea that art is not just object-based, then an artist is more community-based. It's a community practice, a social justice practice. And there it's not really about the object. It's about helping people live their lives, find homes, find community, and survive displacement in a world changed by climate. So those are all. That's the field. To me, another quick way to connect some dots also is to say one way is to avoid the sort of traps of art. That's what Capro used the word traps, and all these things we've been talking about are traps because they sort of trap you in a gallery. That's not avoiding. That's the traps of art. They kind of contain you, and I think Capro's urging us to be more free and not be bound by mainstream predefined routes as artists. And I think earlier you asked about failure too. Quick sidebar. I think failure in the arts would be not making work 5 to 10 years after your art degree. If you went to art school, you just stop. Maybe you're now in interior design and you don't have a practice anymore. That's sad. I think that's a failure. Because to me it would be about continuing that sort of creative spirit, continuously making. Whether or not you achieve success of like a major gallery representation, blue chip or whatever, or whether you find employment in an unexpected place, that could work too. But the field. So earlier, anthropologists have the field, sciences have the field. They go out into the field work and they study phenomena, they take measurements, they create a proposition and go out into the field and test it. And I miss that for artists. The artists have a studio, and in a way maybe there's a field aspect to the studio environment. But no, the field is outside. It's an encountering the unexpected circumstances like wind direction, wind speed, temperature, and dealing with unexpected things and how that influences your art. And then let them go for like a long time, 2 or 3 months. Some artists hated it. Say, well, now my work looks like crap. Well, time has passed. Other people say, yes, 3 months later my art is the best it's been because it has decayed or eroded. So anticipating the sort of temporal aspect was part of the fun of those experiments. You participated a bunch of times. We were in the field there. Oh yeah, Joshua Salmine. Yeah.
I mean, when that burnt down, that was so profound. And it was there, and then it burnt down, and then it wasn't there. And just like my tower, it was there, and then they have this, crazy party, and then it wasn't there. And I took these beautiful photographs of it when it was sort of in this deconstructed thing. And in reality, it was nice that they took it down safely so that I didn't have to, because it was huge and unwieldy. Quite transformative to have your art destroyed and left in a wreckage pile, it was kind of beautiful. The misunderstanding of materials, where if you have the traditional arts, like, drawing and painting and sculpture and this type of thing, versus, maybe more digital arts or more conceptual arts, you are following a lineage. And as much as I want to have the innovation and the newness within that context of a painting versus colored gas or something like that. So,
but I think it is possible by studying the margin and working on a margin or a cusp rather than the center. But in some ways they're antithetical, capitalism and spirituality. Capitalism positing that, there really is nothing outside the marketplace, everything is for sale. And broadly brushed, spirituality insisting on something that is transcendent.
With AI deciding what we're going to think, pretty soon we have this little window of time where we can have thinking that is our own. Did you feel overwhelmingly poisoned by the situation, or did you were uplifted? It's like.
So I've been to every one, and I had mixed feelings about this one. I was glad. For me, the bigger picture is that we still have an art fair, and that's a great thing. And I can complain about it and look at the flaws, but still overall, I think it's a great thing that Seattle has an art fair, and it's Seattle's recognized as an art center, and it should have an art fair. So I think it's good. This year's was not my favorite. This year there was a lot of regional galleries. I was shocked at seeing some galleries. Maybe I'm associating them with some galleries in California, but they looked like beach town gallery tourist art to me. Even some of the colors, like sunset paintings on the beach or something with palm trees, and I was surprised by some of that, but maybe that's the idea, new collectors, I'm totally down with the idea that wasn't quite convinced that the irony was genuine there, and it looked actually like it was trying to be, I don't know, bad art. There was some good stuff. I remember there was some repeat stuff from last year. I missed the blue chip galleries just for the sake of being proud of a major center. The blue chips have not come back. I think there was a single gallery from New York, maybe two. Japan was well represented, and to me, the potential of what will make the Seattle Art Fair relevant on the West Coast is a focus on the Pacific Rim and look toward Japan, not so much toward New York, and see if we can get more Japanese galleries to come over, more Korean galleries this year. This year there were like 4 Korean galleries, some of my favorite work. And to go back to materials, materials presented in unorthodox ways. I do think the Northwest is strong in materials art, materials process, interest in materials, wood, ceramics, and also craft coming from those materials. And the boundary between craft and fine art has been widely seen as blurring and crossing over and this kind of thing. But that's the art fair. I volunteered for 6 hours, 2 days, and I also had time on the opening night Thursday to walk around and ran into you a few times. Wasn't able to work out a date. Met my family down there Saturday, but overall great to see a lot of people. And that first night is so social, and one of the best things about the art fair is seeing everybody, coming out to a place where everyone is, and seeing people you haven't seen for 2 years. So there's a big sort of personal connectivity to the art fair that's really enjoyable, and almost not about the art at that point. It's almost about us. So seeing each other, and even still coming out of the pandemic, it's been slow. Art fairs picking back up. I was at Foster White for a while and saw the sort of surge of interest, and that's the art walk is kind of back mostly, I would say. So aesthetics, ethics, the alethic, still very much with us today, still confusing for people. The beautiful, the good, the true. Some combination of those is ideal. Some combination of those is what the Greeks viewed as perfection. But again, we have this hegemony of the colonial world that still haunts us. I'm sharing models that are Western, and it's increasingly a global world that we live in, and it's important to seek alternatives to those Western traditions that take us back to Plato and Aristotle, and to think about what science was for the Arabs, for instance, or to think about other early cultures that pioneered knowledge and what they discovered. I think there's still a lot of work to be done there. So I can leave you with that too. Yeah. Unartist. Become an unartist. Maybe I became an unartist. Hiding from the radar. I mean, most people don't recognize me as an artist. That's okay. That's fine. But the diving into the river today to see what was down there, that's sort of a performance. So be happy to read some more poems. Draft in progress. I'm still writing, working on my paintings. Public art, of course. Interviewing. Now that Foster White has come to an end, and my experiment of infiltrating the gallery world has come to a conclusion. I learned so much at the gallery world there, but in the end, I don't think they wanted my. They didn't want someone with a PhD with curatorial practice in arts administration. They wanted someone more of an entry-level type thing to stuff envelopes, correct resumes, phone calls. Did you see the Radisky show? We know that you bought a painting in 2018. Come on back and see us again. And,
Well,
it's
it
about
was
sales and
bold.
retail.
It was bold and scary to put a lion in a china shop, and that you made it as long as you did. So I think you were heroic to try to work with in that domain. But I make stuff. I make paintings. I'm a painter, so I do that. And made it as long as you did. So I think you were heroic to try to work with in that domain. But I make stuff. I make paintings. I'm a painter, so I do that. And whether the negotiation with reality, that's on a whole other train track. So it's like you don't that's part of the thing, but it's a parallel kind of concept, where it's really not in the bubble that you're in, that you need to spin. The web you need to spin is the the synthesis and of what you've learned, and the materials and the process and everything. So how can you extricate one part of it, like say the market, from my art career? It's like, well, the market is part of one's career, and being able to share art, is all those commercial talents, but there is a battle there, and I think that innovation, and ingenuity, and all this kinds of, making a positive, bold steps, isn't always received well, and people misunderstand what you're trying to do. But I think the artist has a responsibility to try to unlock and try to tell that story about what you're trying to do, and hopefully they have that reaction, that they can. Are you going to read us a poem?
Yeah, I was going to share some lines from earlier. This is from a long poem called Switchback. How many times the murderer passed right by me, saying to himself, no, not him. The gap in Saturn's rings, on Earth the hottest day in 100,000 years. The wish that I could deliver bad news with kindness. Instead, I stumble, am too cruel. It backfires. The bad news reflects on me. Aber ich kenne meine Sprache noch. Im Kopf besuche ich deutsche Wörter. Und kommen die Wörter, viele und mit dem ein ganze Landschaft, meine unbekannte Familie, verlost und in Amerika jetzt nur 2 Jahre. In the sea, I did not spend time on the bottom, always floating to the top of the waves. Yet on land, I'm walking on the ground all the time, on the bottom. Can't slip along mid-canopy. Make art beside rock art. Like sitting on the train in seats that face the direction of travel, as opposed to sitting looking the opposite direction, as if time was like that too, better from the front than the rear. And the robot body we were talking about earlier, I think I'd get tired of a robot body just as much as this decaying shell of flesh with all the hacks and the software updates. Our robot bodies are going to be offline all the time. You who loved the synthetic also fell in love with me. So, field work. Get out there into an experimental place, whether it's indoor or outdoor. Outdoor is so much more important because there's so much more of the field out there. And if we can find and push art, see, I think that's not a trap of art. That field work there is where art hasn't really pushed or penetrated before. Different contexts, different settings, applied contexts. So part of the economy. But the market then for the artist is not just the artist's objects, but it's also the artist's thinking. It's the artist's plan for a station. It's the artist as thinker helping out a planning committee with these deliverables, with documents, with planning and thinking about art, about stations where people could interact with art and move about the city. So pushing art into those pockets where they seldom have gone before kind of thinking. And Kelly Lyles has also mentioned that she did the drive with the cop type of embedding an artist with a patrol car and going around with them. Sometimes police departments will be open to that because they're open to community. So embedding yourself in a different context, neighborhood advisory council, infiltrating different pockets where art is absent, or the talking about art or about artistic principles, whether it's objects or creativity or imagination, is seldom the case. Like in a planning commission, or maybe there's more art there than I think, but or like another context where those skills are not in the room. It would be good to represent and bring art into that situation in that place. But we could continue. The other dot that needs connecting is that representation and the challenge of representing, reality being and time and space-time. Representing space-time is very challenging. The Shakespearean idea of holding nature up to the universe, and then you see the perfect representation in the mirror of nature. But that's not what the artist does. The artist does more than that. The artist has made something that is not the tree. It might look like the tree, but it's a copy of the tree. Those kinds of thoughts, I think, they have a potential for greater understanding in our time. As we make new devices for images, to contain images. I mean, it's been, 150 years since photography. And the digital revolution, the new forms of art making, there are new forms of art emerging. There are new types of artists. And the non-artist is also very important to involve. And to bring the non-artist to art.
Give me 2 other names that are of that same sophistication or intellectual bulletproofness.
Well, I've read Robert Smithson. I like Smithson's work a lot. I like what he said about sights and non-sights, how he approached what a sculpture looks like, and what he imagined that he was doing, his understanding of going on these trips and travel, and going down to the Yucatan and bringing big plate mirrors and setting them up and photographing what he would call a mirror displacement. To me, that's fundamentally a philosophical sort of exploration of art as sort of an ontological experimental quest of trying to think about human, not just human experience, but this being, Dasein, being. And to try to say art can also inform about that, about ontos, about ontology, being. And an art object can inform about it. Yeah. And this mirror displacement, displacing what it is that we think it's going to reflect. And then, besides Smithson, maybe another great one would be from my dissertation. I relied a lot on the essays that explored time in a book called The Inhuman by a French thinker named Jean-François Lyotard. Oops, little spittle there. Hope you're not offended. I've got all my boosters. It's all good spittle. But Jean-François Lyotard thinking about what will happen when humanity exceeds the point of have a healthy flesh body. We talked about this earlier. He thinks we'll eventually need to download consciousness into an AI or into a machine that'll be capable of autonomous, independent thought. But again, the robot will always be getting hacked and will be breaking down also. So even as our bodies give out, I think the robot body will give out too. And it might be offline for decades and decades and decades in a storage warehouse or something. And then you get booted up again and things have changed. Everybody loves gone. And, I don't think it's a paradise. I think it's going to be another set of problems. But oneself in different contexts like the Neighborhood Advisory Council or like a planning commission, or I need another example, or like, I don't know, working at a zoo, doing lights for a zoo. I think that's what Darren Smith is doing. So you say my practice is something that I maintain as a reflection of being alive to me. So I make things. Could be poems. It doesn't have to be physical things. It doesn't even have to be visual. It could be sound art. But that you're making, and it's a lifelong practice. I'm a believer in a lifelong practice, and also one that you define the success for, so that others, and also not to worry so much about an audience sometimes too. The sort of the audience spread out in time, in the past and the future as well worth addressing. But yeah, I think an artist would like to believe that they relieve suffering through the beauty of their work, and that even the gallery, a successful gallery artist, I'm contributing, I'm doing okay in this rickety, dying world because people buy my art and it brings them peace and solace, and that's good. That's good. I can't really knock that, but I think that's different than saving 100 immigrants from an overturned boat. That's a big difference. But this sort of thinking that I'm helping people, through my books, or that's sort of quite a remove from people themselves. And the audience is of course Teresa Ha-Kyung Cha. I mean, the dream of the audience. We dream of finding that audience. I've not found a very big audience, but I say, I am still important to my audience. I almost make work that pleases me the most. And then not worry, a small audience is sometimes good. An avant-garde is by definition a small audience of special elitists, if you will. Conservatives hate that term, elitists. But these are a small audience. They're working on sound poetry, for instance. They sit around and read poems and go, ee-oh-ah-ah, woo. And they think, wow, I'm brilliant, man. That's so cool. No one's doing that. And it's like, yes, but the audience, if they understand that experimental nature, they enjoy it. But a general audience will come in and go, that's not a poem. And Paul Celan said very famously, a poem in a language which is not spoken is not really a poem. It's got to have a certain sort of accessibility, I think. Mark Jarman called it a clear literal surface that contains these unexpected depths that you can go back to again and again because it is sort of ambiguous and discover new meanings as you grow and change as a person. So audience is hard to find, not just people that buy your work, but ultimately you want a little give and take from the audience. You'd love to have an exchange, Could be very hard to find. Some artists, never find that audience, or the audience occurs after they've passed, and the audience is like Emily Dickinson, virtually unknown in her lifetime. Yes, she published like 6, 7, 8 poems, but compared to Emerson, she was unknown in her lifetime. So her audience is, who was Emily Dickinson's audience? Well, she sent her poems. It's not like she wrote every poem and didn't share it. When she wrote a poem, she imagined sharing it with someone. She would write on envelopes and small scraps of paper. She was a big correspondence person, wrote a lot of letters to family members, and she would send a poem to her Aunt Lavinia or something. And so we know a lot of her poems based on her correspondence. They're in letters and things like that. If you're ever in a barn in New England and you stumble across a big chest of letters from Amherst about 1860 with the first name Emily, grab them as much as you can. But anyway, Emily. So her audience is kind of now, her future audience. She was ahead of her time. What does that mean? Being ahead of your time. Kind of anticipating interest in the future. Is that that's hard, because then in your lifetime you're kind of neglected, you're overlooked. But Shelley always said about poets, they are the unacknowledged legislators. And there's something beautiful and wonderful about being unacknowledged, about not being famous. And I think that goes back to Capro too. Seek alternative paths. Everyone in this country wants to be, they want a big audience. My friend Saab Lofton, the writer, he wants like a Hollywood-size audience. But his stuff is not especially accessible. And it's hard to convince him that a small audience is a good thing. Because he goes, no, being a black person, I want a big audience. I need an economic base to make money. And, I probably have the privilege and the priority of saying, a small audience, that's okay. Because I can say that. But audience is very, very finicky and subtle, and a dream that, like Teresa Hakim Cha would imagine it. And it can be in the future too.
Can you read us another poem that you have?
I might be able to. Let's see if I've got one that I'm working on. This one's a Seattle poem. Elliott Bay was built up, and there's the place where the ships would unload their rocks right off of Pioneer Square waterline. It's called Ballast. It used to be called Ballast Island, where the ships would be unloading their ballast, which is rocks. Ballast Island. San Francisco's Telegraph Hill water cannoned to flatten San Fran in the 1860s. Debris barged north along the coast 1,000 miles to reach Alki, by and by, aka Seattle. First People's canoes beached downtown. Look, I'm not an elite. My life is only visible archaeologically. When I vacuum the room, the vacuum cord snaps back into itself. Imagining my son in his place for just 5 minutes, the future looks so expensive, the past cheap. Audience in the future, Instead of hustling galleries and applying for this and that, I should be excavating a big art bunker, a supreme cache of my best stuff, 2D, 3D videos, carving poems onto slate tablets like Moses or Joe Smith of the Mormon faith, a bunker like King Tut had, rooms full of gold sculptures and contemporary art. Not just for food on my death journey, but real art, lots of art, mostly all art. A grand total of blank objects of to rival antiquity. Emily and her bundles of text, her curatorial eye, testing waters in the moment before turning back to her life of interiors. So I should buck up, get busy. Death as a homecoming. Ancestors, I miss you without knowing you, but your lives even now control me. You sculpt the future in my kids. Immigration in 17th, then a successful 18th and 19th century. May their lives in the 21st be no less. A newly purchased pocket knife so sharp that I cut myself the first time I slice an onion. The flat side of a pumpkin, where it lay in the field. Usually the back of the head when you carved it, the empty face waiting for expression. Hard to tell if the figure in the distance is approaching or walking in the same direction. Is that true then for time? From one vantage, it's not easy at first to tell the past from the future. They seem astonishingly similar. Sudden sunshine on the sea with low clouds overhead, a distant horizon opens up. The offing, so long an exploration subsumed in one job after another, the job always draining, consuming. I have my history, so I can express my memory. I have my memory to contextualize my history. It is not that there is less injustice, because over time, does justice expand? Does it find ways to grow? At the locksmith, I needed to have some keys made. Unusual copies, few other retailers carry. The noise of the keys being cut, so high-pitched, a kind of music almost, harsh cry of some bird I don't know enough about to appreciate. What is making that cry? The cloudfish, year after year in the glass bowl, gained no weight. Then one grew a tumor. I decided to operate. I took the tiny fish out, flapping, laid it on the surface, cut out and around the growth on its head. Came out clean, put it back in the water, skin healed. The patient was glad in its glass bowl, its home, recovering completely for many more years of refined confinement. Yeah.
So we have this world that's burning, and we have this AI that's stripping us of all our creativity and self-worth. What's the post-techno, non-analog, digital corporate nightmare? Where do we find ourselves? Are we going to live under the ground in these very well-connected spaces to the metaverse?
Hopefully that's part of it, but hopefully we still have a surface to go back to. But I don't know. I don't see AI as being that wrong. Iole says that what we really need is the prompts to tell AI what to do. We need the prompts, and the jobs that AI is supposedly taking from people are displaced so that the jobs will be in coming up with prompts for AI. You tried AI, you know. I tried AI at the gallery because it was my job to write about paintings and advertise them on Artsy. So I thought, God, this is kind of tedious. It requires effort. Maybe AI can help me. So AI can look at the painting and go, yes, the blue in the background and the mountains in the foreground, and draws your eye to the horizon, and the balance and the resolution in the corner. And AI can do that, but it's somehow not really about the painting. It's sort of looking at visual clues. It needs a prompt. It needs to say, what does this, to give it a sort of suggestion about interpretation, about what is the significance of some of the details versus others, maybe, to prompt it in that direction. Because otherwise AI doesn't really know what direction you want it to go in. It's going to give you general answers that satisfy preliminary questions. I don't know.
Until it decides what it's going to be asked.
Let's hope not. Gosh, that sounds dark. Yeah. Hopefully, like you were saying, there will be a place always for an analog, a sort of more primitive technology. Flint knapping. We don't need stone tools anymore, but flint knapping is nevertheless a technology that helped us, our ancestors especially, for millennia. So we should not forget how to flint knap, even though there is no contemporary application. We have other materials that make tools. So perhaps we can flint knap as a form of art. Yeah. Remove the jumble around the context.
Holes right out of us.
But that argument also works the other way. It could be that we are becoming more and more human in some ways. And that since technology seems to go hand in hand with a sense of human agency, working, building technologies, enhancing certain innate skills, that's just what we do. We move technologically through time. So you could say, we're not becoming better. But I like to go back to prehistory and the Pleistocene and Neanderthals and modern humans and Denisovans and new types of people that they're finding in China just a few weeks ago. That are not Denisovan, that are not Neanderthal, but are definitely not modern. What are they? There's Homo erectus comes out of Africa. Millennia later, modern humans come out of Africa. That's pretty recent. And they find already populating the world these other humans. And we're still finding out about that and still understanding that. So even to the level of when Neanderthal and modern humans and maybe Denisovans all occupied Europe at the same time at about 40, 30,000 years, 50,000 years ago. And they have stone tool technology. Archaeologists can look at a stone tool technology sample from a cave. And they can say, these cores, this is Levallois technique. And over here, this is Mousterian technique. This is Neanderthal. And they can compare the different assemblages of debitage, of flakes, and connect that back to what type of human was there. But and for years, in the early 20th century, we thought, Neanderthals were dumb and brutish, and they were less smart than us. They were dumb, and it's not true at all. I mean, they adapted our technology for sure. We've shown that archaeologically, and now we know we had sex with them. Some of us have DNA. In fact, when I was telling you earlier, when my daughter did the 23andMe thing, and we found out that we're like 23% Eastern European, only 7% German or something, which was a surprise because my mom is German. We also found out that my DNA, I have like more Neanderthal DNA than like 99% of the population. Again, but it's still a tiny fragment amount.
It explains a lot.
And I do think Neanderthals, they're announcing caves that haven't been opened for long enough that they say Neanderthal had an artistic mind. And then Homo naledi, that's the one that's from the cave that's really difficult to access. You have to go through a very narrow passageway. You have to go deep inside a cave. And the bones that are in there are a weird mix of primitive and modern. And what kind of human or proto-human put their dead inside a cave and then finger fluted the wall nearby? And are the artistic capacity uniquely human or modern human, or are there precursors to what became what we call today artistic thinking? And can we see that in the cave? Is finger fluting art form? I would say absolutely. You know, yeah. And they had a technology. And I often think that Neanderthal and a modern human sat there and argued over technology. Said, man, is this arrowhead making us better? No, it's taking us away from who we are. We should throw down these fucking stone tools. It's making us fucked up. But we're changing. They just changed. They evolved in time. They moved in time and space. We are moving. This planet is hurtling through space. We're hurtling through space here. Light, space, being in time, you know, space and time, gravity, the new particles they're studying. Good stuff. Hard to get into a painting.
So if you were going to write back to us in the future, to us today,
Yeah.
and kind of try to help us navigate through what we're going to see in the next 2, 3,
Yeah.
4 years, and what, like a kind of a love letter or a warning back to this time, what would it say?
You know, I would say that the changes in the world are going to require a lot better immigration and asylum systems as huge groups of people experience diaspora and move around the planet, as they flee broken political systems, as they want better lives for their children and move to different parts of the planet that are inhabitable and less hot. We will have to welcome millions to the temperate zone as they escape the heat belt around the equator. We will have to have mastered ways to build a million homes in 5 years. And we will have to house people and welcome them because I do think equity doesn't go away. I think equity is important going forward. And we need to share, we need to learn how, fine-tune how to share better, I think, with peoples that are less fortunate than us and that are being displaced. Because right now it doesn't seem to work. I mean, both parties have pretty stringent immigration policies, and we're turning away people that are coming from Central America and broken economies. Because they weren't murdered or raped? And it's like, no, they're afraid to go outside at night, so they should be welcome here. And our whole country is founded on this idea that you can be free here. We want you here. So I don't understand this sort of, the whole world, not just America, but this anti-immigrant sort of nationalist. There's not room enough for everybody. And you know, that's, we've got to overcome the fear, you know, of welcoming those people in and letting them change us, and having new models of art making and new cultural traditions, you know, that can only enrich ours and that we can benefit from. And you know, I don't know. I think it's important though to not turn them away. There must be a place for them. They're already here. We need to accommodate them.
And more are coming. And as climate change just totally exacerbates the landscape, and those people are just needing a place to be.
At the meat processing factory, a mechanical screech frightens seagulls away. On the statue's head downtown, a wig of pins keeps the pigeons at bay. Downtown, the starlings deposit enough excrement in one afternoon to attract the attention of the mayor. Proposals vary. Perhaps a large net. A cloud of poison. In the garden, a scarecrow looks drunk, head resting askew on his chest. Here and there in the orchard, a shiny piece of foil dangles like a Christmas ornament.
How will artists adapt to that new? I mean, are we superfluous, or are we just kind of a wet dream for someone with too much money? Is that just what we've become? And like you say, helping immigrants survive a boat journey would be more appropriate for our energies?
Well, I think so. I think we should look at that. I think we should say, that right now that doesn't strike us as an artistic practice. It seems more like social work, maybe, or emergency help aid. But since we know that there are that there's no limit really to the forms of art, and it doesn't just have to be object-based, then I do think that people who are trained to think artistically could be out there helping others in those ways, and have that be a practice, have that be part of their art practice. But I also think, yeah.
So can you name 3 artists that really exemplify your model? Do you think that really of hitting the nail on the head in terms of your ideas and the physical manifestation of that art? Is there any contemporary artists that you can name?
Not off the top of my head. I do think a lot of contemporary artists are focused on wry, ironic comments about art historical in the Western tradition and commenting on that. And that's fun. It's clever. It is fun. It's sexy. But I also think in some ways it's limited. It's keeping art in that box of a marketplace where it produces objects and pleases people through the production of shiny things. And art is so much more than that. The hole in the birdhouse is too small for anything larger than a wren. Where do they go then? Those who are unwelcome, those whose removal is desired. How far must they travel? As they reach the ends of the earth, they discover a city where their depredations are unknown. They flock to the landfill, the sewer outfall, to the grain spilled along the railroad. In the city at the ends of the earth, statues once again exhibit wisdom, their heads streaked with white. I think I might have read that one last time. Yeah. And then some newer things. I worked on a piece called Food Product Reference Image. I became very interested in reference images. Images that we use almost as in a language sense, that we almost like an icon or a logo that transmits information. The way the kids are so good at logos that they can just look at a logo and tell you that's Ronald McDonald, that's Wendy from Wendy's Burgers, and they can look at the logos and tell you. So, food product reference image. The picture on the packaging shows a little of everything: beans and mushrooms, thin red peppers and coiled noodles, all distributed equally in the bowl. I don't see the same variety in the dehydrated ingredients I assemble, but then again, if the image is only a reference, maybe it's too soon to judge. I haven't even followed all the steps. Surely boiling water will swell these shriveled items and lend them a trace of color. By the time I drain the noodles and add the final flavor packet, my expectation for similitude will be tempered by the image. I'll look back and forth between my soup and its representation as I sip, trying not to burn my tongue.
That's a good one. Yeah, they're all good. I like the flourishing and candied experiments that kind of activate the electricity of the imagination and digging up some truth, but always being held down by the gravity and the pressure of the world and the environment, you know.
Kind of sobering, but hopeful, hopefully in the end.
So, well, Dave, it was great to
Great to do
talk
another session here. Al.
this next version of our show. And I hope that explains everything about the universe to everyone out there, and that you've learned as much as I did about, I don't know what we learned, but it was cool. And we'll talk to you again.
Okay, great. Wonderful to be here. And watch the next show too. Yeah, the next in the series. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Alan. And thank you, viewers. Lots of other great artists out there. Go to the next one. Skip ahead a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.